They prosecute the most serious crimes on the planet, but now the judges are being judged. We'll hear the evidence for and against the future of the International Criminal Court. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Inside. Welcome to Insight. The International Criminal Court was set up to prosecute the worst crimes on the planet: genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. A number of large nations, including the United States, China, India, and Turkey, have never signed up to the agreement that established the court. And now 3 African nations have pulled out over claims of bias. In its 14-year history, the court has so far only prosecuted black Africans. Insight's Tig Enright has been investigating the cases for and against the ICC.
These challenges are best addressed not by diminishing support for the court, but by strengthening it from within.
Could this prove to be the final ruling by the International Criminal Court? The former Congolese Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba was accused of failing to stop his troops murdering and raping when he sent them to the neighbouring Central African Republic to quash a coup. Convicted in March of this year, he and his lawyers were brought back in October and convicted together of bribing witnesses to testify in his defence.
Today's judgment sends the clear message that the court is not willing to allow its proceedings to be hampered or destroyed.
Bemba's 18-year sentence was the court's toughest ever, triggering anger among supporters at home and firing a starting gun on a series of African withdrawals from the court's jurisdiction. The South African president, Jacob Zuma, made his attitude clear when he ignored an ICC ruling to arrest the Sudanese leader Omar Hassan al-Bashir while he paid a visit last year. In October, South Africa formalised the snub and notified the ICC that it was leaving. Along with Burundi, the vote to withdraw secured a big majority in its parliament. The decree was signed by President Pierre Nkurunziza, who is himself under investigation after violence erupted following his decision to seek a 3rd term in office. Soon, Gambia followed suit, its information minister not mincing his words in explaining why.
The ICC, despite being called the International Criminal Court, is in fact an international Caucasian court for the persecution and humiliation of people of color, especially Africans.
The ICC is an international court of last resort. It prosecutes charges of war crimes, genocide or other crimes against humanity when national courts are unwilling or unable to do so. Most of the world's countries signed the Rome Statute, the treaty that established it, but only some have allowed themselves to be bound by it. The United States and Russia are among those that signed but didn't ratify or later withdrew. China, India and Turkey are some of the countries that never signed up. In its short history since it was launched in 2002, 9 out of 10 of the ICC's investigations have involved African countries. The court's chief prosecutor has said she respects but regrets the decision by South Africa, Burundi and Gambia to leave.
This is holding people to account for accountability for crimes that are very, very serious. So there is bound to be pushback. Maybe now it is in Africa that we are seeing this. Perhaps when we operate in another region, we will also have a different kind of pushback.
The bad news for the ICC might not yet be over. Sudan, which is not a member, has called on all African countries to pull out. President Bashir, who is wanted to answer charges of genocide in Darfur, made the point directly to Kenya's President Kenyatta last month. He'll remember that the court pressed and later dropped charges of crimes against humanity against him over the post-election violence of 2007. The United Nations has appealed to members not to abandon the ICC.
The world has made enormous strides in building a global system of international criminal justice. Yet these and other gains have also been accompanied by setbacks and shortcomings. Some are concerned that the court has convicted only Africans despite evidence of crimes in other parts of the world.
Court is now in session.
The chief prosecutor has said she'll make a decision imminently on whether to investigate the United States for alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. She might find a decision to do so becomes irresistible. Ty Genwright reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Dr. Phil Clark. He's a political scientist specialising in conflict and post-conflict issues from Africa in the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Phil Clark, the ICC isn't really working as effectively as its originators intended, is it?
No, I think the court's in a lot of trouble at the moment. It's finding most of its cases, in fact, can't get to trial. More of its cases have collapsed than have, in fact, reached the trial stage in The Hague. And the court is having a great deal of political difficulty. It's seen as the African Criminal Court. It's not a global institution yet. It's accused of targeting only one continent. And that's a reputational issue that the court is going to really struggle to throw off in the next 10 or 15 years, I think.
Of the cases that have failed to come to trial, what's a typical reason? Why do they fail?
They fail really for one of two reasons. Often the evidence against individuals is extremely weak. The ICC is really struggling to get its investigators into difficult parts of Africa to gather effective evidence against particular suspects. Or the cases are struggling because of political reasons. And we've seen the Sudanese and the Kenyan governments, for example, interfere very effectively in the ICC's investigations. And that led to the collapse of all of the cases in both Darfur and Kenya. So
interfere? What do?
They do all sorts of things. It's a very systematic form of interference. These governments intimidate witnesses, they hide evidence, they refuse to hand suspects over to the court. I think African governments have worked out very quickly that they can win this game, that the court is based a long way away. It doesn't really understand the mechanics on the ground in Africa very well, and these African governments have learned that very quickly.
We hear about these nations, and you mentioned Darfur. I mean, we kind of know, don't we, on a non-technical level, of course there were war crimes. There were awful things done to people there by all sorts of people, but they cannot come through this technicality. Now, why is that natural justice not turning into actual justice?
I think it shows just how complicated it actually is to build criminal cases on very strong evidence. And to be honest, I think the ICC was very naive when it decided that it would only look at Africa. The view in the court in The Hague, and I've done a lot of research talking to ICC personnel, the idea was that Africa was going to be easy. There was already a lot of evidence of war crimes and genocide. If the court could just get on the ground and sort of vacuum up this evidence, then it could build these cases very effectively. What the ICC has found is that Africa's much tougher than it ever expected. These are volatile conflict areas. Many witnesses are reluctant to speak to international investigators. And so for that reason, we're not seeing this kind of natural justice translate into criminal justice in The Hague.
Is there any point in it continuing?
I think the court is going to continue whether we like it or not. There's a huge amount of international support for it. A lot of international finance has been put into it. But I think the challenge for the court is to make this idea of international justice a reality. And part of that, I believe, is in the case of the African situations, the ICC needs African investigators who understand the dynamics on the ground. And this has been a big mistake by the ICC to only rely largely on Western investigators.
Well, they thought they could just parachute them in and get the job done.
They really did. They thought that British, Australian, in some cases even American investigators who have an expertise from other parts of the world could arrive in Congolese and Sudanese villages and gather very effective evidence. The track record over the last 14 years tells us that's not the case. And until the court starts to take the local context very seriously, it's going to continue to see these cases collapse.
We'll come on to the bigger nations in a moment, but first, some of the African nations are now leaving the jurisdiction of the court. If that trickle becomes a a bigger flow of people going out the exit door, that's a real problem for the court.
It is a problem for the court. I mean, we've seen Burundi, South Africa and the Gambia already begin the process of withdrawal, although it does look like Gambia may rejoin. Their newly elected president, I think, has a different view on this. But there are at least 6 or 7 other African states that have parliamentary debates this coming year about withdrawing from the ICC. So we may see a flood there.
The coming 12 months could be crucial.
It could be crucial, and I think the issue there for the ICC is that, again, it is perceived as against Africa. It is seen as biased against the continent, and I think that's a reputation it's struggling to throw off.
Widening the focus of this, a country like America, good grief, they've got enough lawyers in that country, haven't they? They love legal processes domestically. Why have they shunned this organisation so far?
I think the reason many of the big international powers, that the US, China, Russia, haven't signed up to the ICC is that they really don't want themselves to be under international scrutiny. They're worried about giving over power and sovereignty to international courts. They're worried that this might put a spotlight on their own atrocities. The US is particularly worried about accusations of what its troops have done in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Do you have to be a member of the ICC before a prosecution can be brought against you, or can the court, in theory, prosecute anybody?
The court really can go after anybody, but it makes the court's life a lot easier if states are already signed up to the ICC statute. It usually means that those states will cooperate with the court. The ICC has to go through a lot more sort of difficult legal technicalities to go after suspects from non-signatory states. I think what we're seeing is that the US, China, Russia, India and other major powers are basically saying, look, it's okay for international law to be used against weaker states around the world, but we sure as hell don't want them coming after our people.
And this doesn't stand the test of a difficulty, does it? I mean, Russia, Crimea, suddenly they don't want to play with the International Criminal Court. Similarly, what do you think might happen with a number of prosecutions which are pending, I believe, about the conflict in Afghanistan over the last decade or so?
Indeed. I mean, a lot of evidence has already been sent to the ICC prosecutor about both the UK and the US's involvement in Afghanistan. And the prosecutor keeps saying that she's taking these allegations very seriously. The reality is the ICC will not go after these cases.
You don't think they will?
I don't think they will. I think the prosecutor has already, and it's not just this prosecutor, it was her predecessor as well, have basically said, we don't want to rock the international boat. We don't want to go after the major powers. We're scared that those powers could undermine our work and interfere with us and refuse to cooperate.
So justice isn't really justice. It's just whether it's convenient to have some justice.
Indeed, and I think this has been a problem for the ICC from day one, is that it was set up to go after the biggest crimes committed by the most serious actors. It's not doing that. It's not going after the big international powers that are also responsible for crimes. It's going after relatively small international players, particularly those in African states.
And even then, not necessarily succeeding.
No, and that again is the great tragedy of this, is that the ICC thought that Africa would be easier than the US or the UK, but in fact it also didn't take Africa seriously. It patronised Africa, and as a result of that, even most of the African cases are collapsing.
It's not great value for money either, is it?
No, and this I think is increasingly one of the concerns for the donor states. Many international governments have said, look, we believe in the ICC, we want to fund it, but if you really look at the details, even those international donors are becoming sceptical. Japan is the largest funder of the ICC. The European Union is lagging a long way behind. Part of that, I think, is even a recognition in Europe and other parts of the world that the ICC is not doing what it said it was going to do, and that's why it's not receiving the financial support that perhaps the court would like.
So do you anticipate that more countries might withdraw funding, or at least the level of funding over the coming months?
And indeed, we've already seen it in the last 12 months. We've seen a reduction in EU support. We've seen the Canadian government, another major donor, reduce its support for the ICC. I think the danger here is that it's going to leave the court as a shell of an institution. It will exist in name. It will be embroiled in these African cases for the next 10 years. I think it will struggle there, but it probably won't move out of Africa for lack of resources, but also because of lack of willpower. So this is going to be a very weak court, and it will be embroiled in Africa for at least the next decade.
Dr. Phil Clark, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This is Insight. Coming up, we'll speak to a lawyer who's been involved in cases at the International Criminal Court.